The grand corridors of Buckingham Palace held their breath on that crisp autumn morning, when news began to ripple through the ancient walls. Something extraordinary had happened, something that would shake the very foundations of royal protocol and tradition. The sealed will of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, had finally been opened, and what lay within those confidential pages would set tongues wagging across the Commonwealth and beyond. Prince Philip had passed away on April 9, 2021, leaving behind a legacy that spanned over 7 decades of service to the crown. His marriage to Queen Elizabeth II had been the cornerstone of the British monarchy's modern era, and his influence extended far beyond what the public ever truly knew. When he died at the age of 99, just months shy of his 100th birthday, the nation mourned a man who had been a constant presence in their lives, a figure of strength, wit, and unwavering dedication. The circumstances surrounding his will had always been shrouded in mystery. Unlike most legal documents that become public record after death, Philip's will was sealed by the High Court in London for 90 years. This extraordinary measure, granted by Sir Andrew MacFarlane, the most senior family judge in England and Wales, was unprecedented in recent royal history. The judge had ruled that keeping the will private was necessary to protect the dignity and standing of the Queen and the royal family. But what could possibly require such extreme secrecy? For months after Philip's death, speculation ran rampant. Royal watchers, historians, and journalists debated endlessly about what the document might contain. Some suggested it held details about Philip's vast personal wealth, accumulated through decades of careful investments and inheritances from his own royal lineage. Others whispered about personal bequests to staff members who had served him faithfully over the years, perhaps revealing a softer side to the often stern Duke. Still others wondered if there were family secrets, private messages, or even controversial opinions that the palace wished to keep hidden from public scrutiny. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had always maintained a special relationship with Prince Philip. In the years leading up to his death, observers noted how Philip had taken to the young woman who had married his grandson William. Unlike some members of the royal family who viewed newcomers with suspicion, Philip saw in Catherine a refreshing combination of grace, intelligence, and genuine dedication to duty. She reminded him, some said, of a young Queen Elizabeth. Before the weight of the crown had settled so heavily upon her shoulders, during family gatherings at Sandringham and Balmoral, Philip would often engage Catherine in lengthy conversations about everything from conservation to classical music. He appreciated her straightforward manner and her refusal to be intimidated by royal protocol. Catherine, for her part, respected Philip's sharp mind and valued his counsel on navigating the treacherous waters of royal life. She had learned early on that Philip's gruff exterior masked a deeply thoughtful and caring individual, especially when it came to the future of the monarchy. The relationship between Philip and Camilla, the queen consort, was far more complex and strained. When Camilla married Prince Charles in 2005, Philip had accepted the union with reluctant grace, understanding that his son's happiness was paramount. However, those close to the family knew that Philip never fully warmed to Camilla in the way he had hoped. The shadow of Diana still loomed large, and Philip's loyalty to his late daughter-in-law, despite their occasional disagreements, created an invisible barrier between him and Camilla. Camilla had tried, in her own way, to win Philip's approval. She attended family functions, participated in royal duties, and supported Charles through his various challenges. But Philip remained politely distant, their interactions cordial but never truly warm. Some attributed this to Philip's old-fashioned sense of propriety and his belief in the sanctity of marriage vows. Others suggested it was simply a personality clash between two strong-willed individuals who approached royal life from fundamentally different perspectives. As the months passed after Philip's death, life in the royal household continued with its usual rhythms. The Queen, though deeply affected by the loss of her husband of 73 years, carried on with her duties with characteristic stoicism. Catherine threw herself into her royal work, taking on more responsibilities and supporting both the Queen and Prince William during this difficult transition. Camilla, now more prominent in her role alongside Charles, worked to solidify her position within the family hierarchy, but beneath the surface of royal routine, something was stirring. The executors of Philip's estate were working quietly behind the scenes, sorting through the complexities of his final wishes. There were properties to consider, personal effects to distribute, and financial arrangements to implement. Each decision had to be made with careful consideration for both legal requirements and family sensitivities. The process was taking longer than anyone had anticipated, and the extended timeline only fueled more speculation about what the will might contain. Then came the day when senior members of the royal family were summoned to a private meeting at Windsor Castle. The invitation was discreet, the purpose vague, but the implications clear. Something significant was about to be revealed. Catherine received her invitation while working in her office at Kensington Palace, preparing for an upcoming engagement focused on early childhood development. When she read the formal request for her presence at Windsor, her heart skipped a beat. She knew instinctively that this meeting would be about Philip's will. Camilla, too, received her summons. She was at Clarence's house, reviewing correspondence with her secretary, when the sealed envelope arrived. As she read the contents, a flicker of concern crossed her face. Why now? What had they discovered in Philip's final testament that required such a formal gathering? She had assumed that any provisions Philip had made would be straightforward, perhaps some charitable bequests and family heirlooms distributed according to tradition. But the gravity of this summons suggested something far more consequential was at hand. The stage was set for a revelation that would alter the dynamics within the royal family. As Catherine and Camilla separately prepared for the meeting at Windsor Castle, neither could have predicted the extraordinary contents of Philip's sealed will. The old Duke, even in death, was about to make one final, decisive statement about the future of the monarchy and those he trusted to carry it forward into a new era. The morning of the meeting dawned gray and overcast, typical of an English November day. Windsor Castle stood majestically against the moody sky, its ancient stones holding centuries of royal secrets within their walls. Catherine arrived first, her car sweeping through the gates with practiced efficiency. She wore a navy blue dress, elegant but understated, her hair pulled back in a simple chignon. As she walked through the corridors she knew so well, she felt an unusual nervousness in her stomach. Queen Elizabeth was already waiting in the oak drawing room, a private space she had often used for family meetings. Despite her advanced age and recent widowhood, the Queen maintained her regal bearing, though those who knew her well could see the subtle signs of grief that lingered in her eyes. She greeted Catherine warmly, a rare smile crossing her face. The Queen had grown increasingly fond of her granddaughter-in-law over the years. Appreciating Catherine's steadiness and her genuine commitment to royal service, Prince Charles arrived next, his expression serious and contemplative. As the heir to the throne, he had been briefed slightly more than the others about the general nature of Philip's provisions, though even he did not know all the details. He kissed his mother's hand in the traditional gesture of respect before taking his seat. Behind him came Camilla, dressed in a cream-colored suit, her face carefully composed but her hands betraying slight tension as she clasped them together. Prince William entered the room moments later, taking his place beside Catherine. He reached for her hand briefly, a small gesture of support that did not go unnoticed by those present. The couple had faced many challenges together, but this felt different. There was an anticipation in the air, a sense that they were about to cross a threshold into unknown territory. The Queen's private secretary, along with Philip's longtime solicitor, completed the small gathering. The solicitor, a distinguished gentleman in his 70s named Sir Robert Fitzwilliam, carried a leather document case that commanded everyone's attention. He had served Philip for over 40 years and had been entrusted with ensuring that the Duke's final wishes were executed precisely as intended. His face revealed nothing as he prepared to begin the proceedings. After a few formal preliminaries, Sir Robert opened the document case and withdrew several folders. His voice, cultured and measured, filled the room as he began to read from Philip's will. The opening sections contained the expected provisions for various charities Philip had supported throughout his life. Substantial sums were designated for causes related to wildlife conservation, military veterans, and youth development programs. These announcements were met with nods of approval from those assembled. Philip's philanthropic legacy was well known. These bequests surprised no one. Then, Sir Robert reached a section that caused a perceptible shift in the room's atmosphere. Philip had made specific provisions regarding certain royal estates and properties that had been under his personal stewardship. While much of the royal property belonged to the crown and passed according to established succession rules, Philip had retained personal ownership of several smaller estates and valuable collections. The solicitor explained that Philip had given considerable thought to how these assets should be distributed, looking not just to the present generation, but to the future of the monarchy itself. It was here that Catherine's name first appeared in the document. Philip had bequeathed to her a collection of rare books from his personal library, volumes on history, philosophy, and governance that he had collected over his lifetime. More significantly, he had designated her as the trustee of a substantial educational fund he had established, one intended to support young people pursuing careers in public service and conservation. The responsibility was enormous, and the trust it represented was profound. Catherine felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes as Sir Robert read these provisions. She had known Philip valued her, but this concrete demonstration of his faith in her judgment and character was overwhelming. She thought back to their conversations in the gardens at Sandringham, when Philip would quiz her about various historical figures and their leadership qualities. He had been preparing her, she realized now, not just with advice but with these tangible tools for the future. But the room's attention sharpened even more when Sir Robert reached the next section. Philip had created a special provision regarding his personal jewelry collection. Pieces that had been in his family for generations, some dating back to his Greek and Danish royal heritage. These items held not just monetary value but deep historical and sentimental significance. Philip had decided that rather than following traditional patterns of inheritance, these pieces should be held in trust for Catherine, with the understanding that she would eventually pass them to Prince George's future wife. Continuing a chain of women who represented the best qualities of royal service, the implications were staggering. By bypassing the direct line to Camilla, Philip was making a clear statement about whom he trusted to carry forward his values and legacy. The jewelry was not merely decorative. Each piece told a story about Philip's heritage, about his journey from a displaced prince to the consort of the British Queen. By entrusting them to Catherine, Philip was essentially declaring her the spiritual heir to his vision for the monarchy's future. Camilla's face remained impassive, but those watching closely could see the slight tightening around her mouth, the way her fingers gripped the arm of her chair just a bit more firmly. This was more than a simple distribution of property. This was a public declaration, even in this private setting, of Philip's assessment of the two women in his family. It stung. There was no denying that, even as Camilla told herself that she had not expected anything different. She had never felt truly accepted by Philip. Now she had confirmation of that reality in legal terms. Charles shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He loved his wife and respected Catherine. This was not a choice he wanted to see formalized in such stark terms. Yet he also understood his father. Philip had always been brutally honest about his opinions. He had structured his will to reflect his genuine beliefs about who would best serve the monarchy in the decades to come. Charles could not fault his father for that honesty, even if it created uncomfortable family dynamics. Sir Robert continued reading, but the emotional tone in the room had shifted. There were other provisions, other bequests to various family members and staff, but everyone's mind was still processing the significance of what had just been revealed. The Queen herself seemed unsurprised, leading many in the room to conclude that she had known about these provisions all along, perhaps had even influenced them. Her relationship with Catherine had deepened significantly in recent years, and she too saw in her granddaughter-in-law qualities that reminded her of her younger self. As the reading concluded, Sir Robert carefully returned the documents to his case. There would be time for questions, he assured everyone, and the detailed implementation of these provisions would take months to complete. But the essential message had been delivered. Philip, through his will, had taken one last opportunity to shape the future of his family and the institution he had served for so long. His voice, even from beyond the grave, carried weight and authority. The meeting adjourned with polite formalities, but the atmosphere remained charged with unspoken emotions. Catherine felt both honored and burdened by Philip's trust. She had always tried to live up to the responsibilities that came with her royal role. But this felt like a sacred charge, a commission directly from a man she had deeply respected. As she walked back through Windsor's corridors with William, they spoke in hushed tones about what had just transpired and what it would mean for their future. Camilla, walking slightly ahead with Charles, maintained her composure with the skill born of years and the public eye. She would not show hurt or disappointment. Not here, not now. But inside she felt the familiar ache of being the outsider, the one who had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Charles squeezed her hand reassuringly, and she drew strength from his support. They would navigate this as they had navigated everything else, together and with dignity. In the days following the reading of Philip's will, life at Kensington Palace took on a different quality for Catherine. She found herself wandering through the rooms at odd hours, thinking about the weight of responsibility that Philip had placed upon her shoulders. The books he had left her arrived in carefully packed crates, each volume wrapped in protective paper and catalogued with meticulous precision. As she unwrapped them one by one, she discovered handwritten notes Philip had left in many of the margins, his distinctive script offering commentary, questions, and insights. One book in particular caught her attention. It was a well-worn copy of a biography about Queen Victoria, and Philip had filled it with annotations. In one passage about Victoria's relationship with Prince Albert, Philip had written in the margin about the importance of a consort understanding their role as supporter rather than competitor. Further down the page, he had noted how the best royal marriages were partnerships built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Catherine sat with this book for hours, understanding that Philip was speaking to her, not just as a grandfather-in-law, but as someone passing on hard-won wisdom. William watched his wife grapple with these revelations with a mixture of pride and concern. He had always known his grandfather held Catherine in high regard, but even he had not fully grasped the depth of Philip's confidence in her. One evening, as they sat together in their private sitting room after putting the children to bed, William spoke openly about his own feelings. He told Catherine that his grandfather had once said to him, years ago when their engagement was first announced, that Catherine had the quality the monarchy needed most: authenticity combined with adaptability. The educational fund that Philip had established, with Catherine as its trustee, required immediate attention. The fund had been seeded with a substantial portion of Philip's personal fortune, and it came with detailed guidance about his vision. Philip wanted to support young people, particularly those from underserved communities, who showed promise in fields related to environmental conservation, sustainable development, and public service. He had been deeply concerned about the future of the planet and believed that investing in the next generation of leaders was crucial. Catherine threw herself into this work with characteristic dedication. She met with educational experts, environmental scientists, and community leaders to develop a framework for the fund's operations. She insisted that the selection process be merit-based and transparent. Wanting to honor Philip's vision while ensuring the fund would have lasting impact, in these meetings, those who worked with her were struck by how seriously she took the responsibility, how she constantly referred back to Philip's written guidance. Determined to implement his wishes faithfully, the jewelry collection presented a different kind of challenge. When the pieces were formally transferred to her care, Catherine was overwhelmed by their beauty and historical significance. There were brooches that had belonged to Philip's mother, Princess Alice of Battenberg, a woman whose own story of courage and compassion during World War II had left an indelible mark on history. There were cufflinks and tie pins from Philip's father, Prince Andrew of Greece, tangible connections to a royal lineage that had been disrupted by war and exile. Most moving of all was a delicate sapphire necklace that Philip had commissioned early in his marriage to Elizabeth. He had never given it to the Queen, instead keeping it aside for reasons he had explained in a letter that accompanied the collection. In that letter, written in Philip's own hand, just months before his death, he explained that this necklace was meant for someone who represented the future, someone who would carry forward the values he and Elizabeth had tried to instill in the monarchy. He had chosen Catherine because he believed she understood what it meant to serve something greater than oneself, Reading Philip's letter, Catherine wept. She sat alone in her dressing room, the letter clutched in her hands, and allowed herself to fully feel the enormity of what Philip had entrusted to her. This was not just about jewelry or money or even legacy. This was about Philip believing that she would be a guardian of the monarchy's soul. She would help guide it through whatever challenges lay ahead. The responsibility was almost crushing in its weight, but Catherine knew she would not shrink from it. Philip had believed in her, and she would prove him right. Meanwhile, the news of Philip's bequests was beginning to leak beyond the immediate family circle. Royal staff members, bound by confidentiality agreements, but human nonetheless, shared whispered conversations about what they had heard. Soon, trusted royal correspondents began receiving anonymous tips about the contents of the will. While the full details remained protected by the court's sealing order, enough information emerged to fuel intense speculation in the press. The newspapers ran with headlines suggesting a royal rift and a snub to Camilla. The commentators debated what Philip's choices meant for the future of the monarchy. Some praised him for looking forward and investing in Catherine, whom they saw as the modern face of the royal family. Others criticized what they viewed as a deliberate slight to Camilla, arguing that it created unnecessary divisions within the family. The palace declined to comment officially. Maintaining its position that the will's contents were private family matters, Camilla faced this media scrutiny with the resilience she had developed over decades in the public eye. She continued with her scheduled engagements, visiting charities, attending state functions, and supporting Charles in his duties. To those who worked closely with her, she maintained that she harbored no ill will toward Catherine and respected Philip's right to dispose of his property as he saw fit. But privately, in moments of vulnerability with Charles, she admitted how much it hurt to be so publicly overlooked. To have her years of service and adjustment to royal life seemingly dismissed, Charles found himself in the uncomfortable position of trying to support both his wife and his daughter-in-law while honoring his late father's wishes. He arranged for private conversations with both women, emphasizing the importance of family unity despite the awkward circumstances. To Camilla, he spoke of his love and appreciation for all she had sacrificed and endured for their life together. To Catherine, he expressed his support for her new responsibilities and his hope that she would indeed become the bridge between tradition and modernity that the monarchy needed. Queen Elizabeth, observing these family dynamics from her privileged position as matriarch, chose to intervene in her own subtle way. She invited Catherine to Balmoral for a private weekend. Just the two of them, something she rarely did with any family member. During long walks through the Scottish Highlands that Philip had loved so much, the Queen spoke to Catherine about the burden of expectation, about the loneliness that sometimes came with royal duty, and about the importance of staying true to one's values even when the path was difficult. The Queen also shared stories about Philip that few people knew. She spoke of his insecurities when he first married her, his struggle to find his place as consort, his determination to modernize the monarchy while preserving its essential dignity. She told Catherine that Philip had seen in her someone who could navigate that same delicate balance, someone who could bring fresh perspectives without losing sight of timeless principles. Coming from the Queen, these words carried immense weight, and Catherine understood that she was receiving not just approval but a kind of royal commission. Back in London, preparations were underway for the first board meeting of the Philip Duke of Edinburgh Educational Trust, as the fund was to be officially named. Catherine had assembled a distinguished group of trustees, including educators, scientists, and business leaders who shared Philip's vision. She had personally reached out to each one, explaining not just the fund's practical goals, but the spirit in which Philip had created it. She wanted trustees who would be bold, who would take risks on young people others might overlook, who would measure success not in conventional terms but in genuine impact. As Catherine prepared for this meeting, reviewing files and proposals late into the evening, William brought her a cup of tea and sat beside her. He told her that his grandfather would be proud of how seriously she was taking this charge. He reminded her that Philip had been a man of action, someone who believed that institutions existed to serve people, not the other way around. Armed with this perspective, Catherine felt ready to step fully into the role Philip had envisioned for her. knowing that she carried not just his material legacy, but his values and vision for a better world. Clarence House, the official residence of King Charles and Queen Camilla, carried a different atmosphere in the weeks following the revelation of Philip's will. Camilla had learned long ago to maintain a brave face in public, to smile through criticism and carry on with grace, despite whatever storms were brewing around her. This situation, however, cut deeper than most of the challenges she had faced over the years. It was not about tabloid speculation or public opinion. This was family, and it was Philip's final judgment on her place within that family. On a particularly dreary afternoon, Camilla sat in her private study, a room she had decorated with her own books and photographs, creating a sanctuary within the formal grandeur of the residence. She held a cup of tea that had gone cold while she stared out the window at the gray London sky. Her lady-in-waiting, a trusted friend of many years, sat quietly nearby, understanding that sometimes the most valuable support was simply being present without demanding conversation. Eventually, Camilla began to speak, her voice low and reflective. She talked about her complicated relationship with Philip over the years. She acknowledged that she had never felt his warmth, never experienced the kind of acceptance she had hoped for. She had tried to win him over with her dedication to royal duty, her support of Charles, her genuine efforts to contribute to the family's work. But Philip had remained politely distant, correct in his behavior, but never truly welcoming. Now she understood that his feelings had been even more definite than she had realized. What troubled Camilla most was not the material aspects of the will. She had her own resources, and had never expected significant bequests from Philip. What hurt was the symbolic nature of his choices, the way he had looked past her to invest his hopes in Catherine. It felt like a public declaration that she would always be the second choice. The compromise, the woman who had disrupted the perfect fairy tale. Even death had not softened Philip's judgment, and that realization brought a profound sadness. Yet Camilla was nothing if not practical and resilient. She had survived decades of hostile press coverage, public disapproval. In comparison to the beloved Diana, she had endured the long wait to marry Charles, the gradual and hard-won acceptance by the public, and the constant scrutiny of her every action. This was another challenge, painful but not insurmountable. She would do what she had always done, carry on with dignity, focus on her work, and prove through her actions that she deserved her place in the royal family. Charles found his wife in her study that evening and joined her by the window. He wrapped his arms around her, offering the comfort of his presence and his unwavering support. He spoke to her about his father's complexity, about how Philip's rigid sense of tradition sometimes blinded him to other virtues. Charles assured Camilla that her value to him and to the monarchy was not diminished by his father's will. He reminded her of all she had accomplished, the charities she championed, the causes she had brought attention to, the steadiness she provided during difficult times. Their conversation turned to Catherine. And here both Charles and Camilla found themselves in agreement. They both genuinely liked and respected her. Catherine had always been gracious to Camilla, never presumptuous, always respectful of the complicated dynamics she had married into. She had worked hard to maintain good relationships with all family members, navigating the minefield of royal politics with impressive skill. The situation created by Philip's will was not Catherine's fault, and it would be wrong to allow it to create lasting animosity. Camilla made a decision that night that spoke to her character. Rather than retreating into hurt feelings or allowing a rift to develop, she would reach out to Catherine directly. She would acknowledge the awkwardness of the situation, while also making clear that she held no grudge. The two women had different roles to play in the royal family, different strengths and different challenges, but they did not need to be adversaries. Philip's judgment, however painful, did not have to define their relationship going forward. The meeting between Camilla and Catherine took place a week later at Kensington Palace. Catherine had been surprised, but pleased to receive Camilla's request for a private conversation. She had been worried about how Philip's will might affect their relationship and had been preparing herself for potential tension or conflict. Instead, she found Camilla to be gracious and surprisingly vulnerable. They sat in Catherine's private sitting room, tea and biscuits on the table between them, and spoke with an honesty that their relationship had previously lacked. Camilla acknowledged the hurt she felt from Philip's choices, but emphasized that she understood his reasoning. She spoke about the difficulty of entering the royal family as an outsider, of always feeling judged against an impossible standard. Catherine listened with genuine empathy, recognizing in Camilla's experiences echoes of her own challenges in adapting to royal life. Catherine, for her part, expressed her own discomfort with the situation. She had not sought these particular responsibilities, and certainly had not wanted them to come at the expense of causing pain to other family members. She made clear that she had always admired Camilla's resilience and dedication, qualities that deserved recognition regardless of Philip's personal feelings. The two women found common ground in their shared understanding of how difficult it could be to live under constant public scrutiny while trying to maintain authentic relationships and genuine purpose. As their conversation progressed, something unexpected happened. They began to laugh together, sharing stories about the absurdities of royal protocol, the challenges of living in historic buildings with temperamental plumbing, the difficulty of always having to look perfect in photographs. They discovered that they had more in common than either had realized. Both were women who had chosen to embrace royal duty despite knowing the sacrifices it would require. Both were committed to supporting their husbands while also carving out meaningful work of their own. Both understood the weight of public expectation and the sometimes crushing pressure to represent an institution larger than themselves. This conversation marked a turning point. While they would never be close friends, Camilla and Catherine developed a mutual respect and understanding that would serve them both well in the years ahead. They made an implicit agreement to support each other publicly, to present a united front when family occasions required it, and to avoid allowing others to pit them against each other. In a world where royal women were so often forced into competitive narratives, they chose collaboration over conflict. The public got its first glimpse of this new dynamic at a state banquet a few weeks later. Catherine and Camilla were seated near each other, and observers noted the warmth of their interactions, the genuine smiles, the easy conversation. For those watching the royal family closely, it was clear that something had shifted. The tensions that might have emerged from Philip's will had been diffused. Through mature communication and mutual goodwill, behind the scenes, this rapprochement pleased both Charles and William immensely. They had worried about the potential for family division and were relieved to see the two women navigating the situation with grace. Queen Elizabeth, upon hearing about the meeting between Camilla and Catherine, expressed quiet satisfaction. She had always believed that the monarchy's strength lay not in avoiding difficult situations, but in handling them with dignity and wisdom. Her granddaughter-in-law and daughter-in-law had demonstrated both qualities. Camilla continued to focus on her own royal work with renewed energy. She threw herself into her literacy campaigns, her support for victims of domestic abuse, her patronage of various arts organizations. She traveled extensively, representing the crown at events both grand and modest. In every appearance, she demonstrated the commitment and professionalism that had gradually won over a skeptical public. Philip's will might have wounded her personally, but it would not define her contribution to the monarchy. Yet in quiet moments, Camilla still felt the sting of Philip's judgment. She would occasionally wonder what she might have done differently to earn his approval, what gaps in her character or conduct he had seen that made him place his faith elsewhere. These thoughts would come unbidden, usually late at night when the day's armor of confidence had been set aside. But Camilla had learned over the years that self-doubt was a luxury she could not afford. Morning would come, and with it new responsibilities, new opportunities to prove herself through action rather than dwelling on past disappointments. The royal family moved forward, its members having navigated yet another potential crisis through communication, compromise, and commitment to the larger purpose they all served. Philip's will had revealed his preferences and priorities, creating temporary discomfort but ultimately leading to greater understanding. In death, as in life, Philip had managed to challenge his family to be better, to think more deeply about what truly mattered, and to focus on the future rather than remaining trapped in old patterns and grievances. 6 months after the reading of Philip's will, Catherine stood before a gathering of distinguished guests at St. James's Palace for the official launch of the Philip, Duke of Edinburgh Educational Trust. The room was filled with educators, environmental activists, young people who would benefit from the Trust's work, and members of the royal family who had come to support this new venture. Catherine had spent countless hours preparing for this moment. Wanting to ensure that everything reflected Philip's vision and values, she wore a simple navy dress, deliberately understated, with only a single piece of jewelry, a brooch that had belonged to Philip's mother. The choice was symbolic, connecting past and present, honoring Philip's heritage while looking forward to the Trust's future impact. As she took her place at the podium, Catherine felt a momentary flutter of nerves, but then she thought of Philip's steady presence during their many conversations, and her voice emerged clear and confident. Her speech was remarkable, not for flowery language, but for its substance and passion. Catherine spoke about Philip's lifelong commitment to young people, his belief that every individual had potential waiting to be unlocked through opportunity and encouragement. She shared specific examples of programs Philip had championed during his lifetime, from the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme to his support for innovation in science and technology. She made clear that this trust was not a museum piece commemorating past achievements, but a living, active force for positive change. What resonated most with the audience was Catherine's honesty about the responsibility she felt. She acknowledged that stepping into Philip's shoes was impossible, that his combination of vision, energy, and determination was unique. But she pledged that she would dedicate herself to ensuring the trust lived up to its namesake's standards. She announced the first cohort of scholarship recipients, young people from diverse backgrounds who would receive support for their education and projects in environmental conservation, sustainable development, and community leadership. Among those first scholarship recipients was a young woman from a mining town in Wales who had developed an innovative approach to reclaiming abandoned industrial sites as wildlife habitats. There was a young man from inner-city London who had created a mentorship program, connecting at-risk youth with opportunities in green technology. Each recipient embodied something Philip had valued, not just academic achievement, but practical application of knowledge to solve real problems. As Catherine presented each scholarship, she provided personal comments about why their work mattered, demonstrating that she had genuinely engaged with their stories and aspirations. The media coverage of the launch was overwhelmingly positive. Commentators noted how Catherine had grown into her role, how she combined grace with substance, warmth with professionalism. Comparisons to Diana were inevitable, but felt less forced than in earlier years. Catherine was establishing her own identity, her own approach to royal duty that drew on the best of tradition while embracing contemporary values. The Trust launch was seen as evidence of her maturity and capability, proof that Philip's confidence had not been misplaced. Watching from the audience, Camilla felt genuinely pleased with how the event unfolded. She had chosen to attend, despite knowing it might be uncomfortable, because she understood the importance of showing family unity. Throughout the ceremony, she applauded warmly, smiled at the right moments, and later mingled with guests, discussing the Trust's work with genuine interest. Several journalists noted her presence and gracious behavior, interpreting it correctly as a sign that any initial awkwardness over Philip's will had been resolved. William stood beside his wife during the formal photographs, pride evident in his expression. He had witnessed firsthand the countless hours Catherine had devoted to bringing this vision to life. He had seen her wrestle with decisions about the Trust's structure, debate with experts about the best approaches to achieve maximum impact, and push herself to fully understand the complex issues surrounding education and environmental sustainability. His grandfather had chosen well, William thought. Catherine would honor Philip's legacy not through slavish adherence to the past, but through thoughtful innovation grounded in enduring values. The Queen, though not physically present due to her advancing age and mobility issues, sent a personal message that was read during the ceremony. In it, she expressed her pride in seeing Philip's final project come to fruition and her confidence in Catherine's leadership. The message was brief but powerful, carrying the weight of the monarch's approval and blessing. For those who understood the nuances of royal communication, this public endorsement of Catherine's role was significant, essentially placing the crown's authority behind Philip's choices in the weeks following the launch. The trust began its real work. Catherine insisted on being more than a figurehead. She met regularly with the trust's staff, reviewed applications personally, and made site visits to see scholarship recipients' projects firsthand. On one occasion, she spent a full day at a coastal restoration project, getting her hands dirty helping to plant native grasses, speaking at length with volunteers about their motivations and challenges. Photographs of a mud-splattered Princess of Wales went viral on social media. Earning praise for her hands-on approach, the Trust also began collaborating with existing organizations, multiplying its impact through strategic partnerships. Catherine had learned from Philip that effective philanthropy was not about working in isolation, but about building networks and leveraging resources. She reached out to environmental groups, educational institutions, and businesses, creating a web of connections that allowed the Trust's relatively modest resources to generate outsized results. Her business acumen, often overlooked in favor of focus on her fashion choices or family life, became evident in these strategic decisions. One partnership proved particularly meaningful. The Trust connected with a network of indigenous communities in the Commonwealth who were working to preserve traditional ecological knowledge. While addressing modern environmental challenges, Catherine championed this collaboration. Recognizing that Philip's global perspective and appreciation for diverse cultures would have embraced such work, she traveled to several Commonwealth nations, meeting with community leaders and learning about their conservation efforts, always emphasizing that the Trust was there to support rather than direct their work. These trips generated extensive positive media coverage, but they also exposed Catherine to some criticism. Certain commentators questioned whether a princess jetting around the world was truly environmentally conscious. Regardless of the cause, others suggested that her involvement in indigenous issues risked perpetuating colonial patterns of wealthy Westerners swooping in to save other cultures. Catherine took these criticisms seriously, consulting with experts about how to approach the work more thoughtfully and making adjustments to ensure the Trust's engagement was genuinely respectful and partnership-based. Back in Britain, the Trust's impact was becoming visible in concrete ways. Scholarship recipients were achieving remarkable things. The young woman from Wales secured additional funding to expand her habitat reclamation project to multiple sites, creating employment opportunities in economically depressed areas while restoring biodiversity. The young man from London saw his mentorship program adopted by several local authorities as a model for youth engagement. Their successes reflected well on the Trust, and by extension, on Catherine's leadership. Public perception of Catherine continued to evolve. She was increasingly seen not just as William's wife or the mother of future kings, but as a significant figure in her own right. The Trust work, combined with her continued focus on early childhood development through other initiatives, established her as someone with genuine expertise and commitment in specific policy areas. She was invited to speak at conferences, consulted by government officials, and featured in serious long-form journalism that explored her ideas rather than just her wardrobe. This evolution did not escape notice within the royal family. Charles, now king, recognized that Catherine was becoming a valuable asset to the monarchy, someone who could connect with younger generations while maintaining respect for tradition. He began involving her more directly in strategic planning for the family's future direction, valuing her insights on how to remain relevant in rapidly changing times. Their working relationship, initially somewhat formal and careful, developed into genuine mutual respect and collaboration. For Catherine herself, the work was both exhausting and energizing. There were days when the responsibilities felt overwhelming, and she questioned whether she was truly capable of fulfilling Philip's expectations. But then she would meet a scholarship recipient whose life had been changed by the Trust's support, or receive a letter from a community that had been helped by one of the Trust's partnerships. And she would remember why it mattered. Philip had believed she could do this work, and increasingly, she believed it too. The Trust's first annual report, published a year after its launch, documented impressive achievements. Dozens of young people supported, multiple partnerships established, measurable environmental impact from funded projects, and growing recognition of the trust as a leader in its. 3 years had passed since the reading of Philip's will. The royal family gathered once again at Windsor Castle, this time for a very different occasion. It was the anniversary of Philip's death, and the family had decided to mark it privately with a small memorial service in the chapel where he had been laid to rest. The atmosphere was reflective rather than somber, a celebration of Philip's life and legacy rather than a dwelling on loss. Catherine arrived early. Loss had become her habit for important family occasions. She wanted a few moments alone in the chapel, a chance to speak silently to Philip about all that had transpired since his death. She knelt in a pew near his tomb, her head bowed, and thought about the journey she had been on. The trust was thriving, exceeding even the ambitious goals they had set at its launch. The jewelry collection remained carefully preserved, waiting for the day it would pass to the next generation. But more than these tangible things, Catherine felt she had internalized something of Philip's spirit, his combination of pragmatism and idealism, his refusal to accept that things could not be improved. She was joined shortly by William, who sat beside her and took her hand. They had weathered many challenges together in their years of marriage. But the responsibility Philip had placed on Catherine had affected them both. William had watched his wife grow in confidence and capability, seen her tackle complex issues with increasing sophistication, and witnessed her genuine commitment to making a difference. He had provided support when she doubted herself and celebration when she succeeded. Understanding that his role was to be her partner in the fullest sense, Queen Elizabeth entered the chapel with careful, measured steps, her mobility limited but her presence still commanding. At her advanced age, she had become more reflective about legacy and succession. Watching Catherine honor Philip's trust had confirmed her own assessment that the monarchy's future was in capable hands. The Queen had seen many people enter the royal family over her long reign, and she had learned to distinguish between those who truly understood the nature of service and those who merely enjoyed the privileges. Catherine understood, just as Philip had Charles and Camilla arrive together, their relationship strengthened by the challenges they had navigated. Camilla had found her own path forward, accepting that her contributions to the monarchy would be judged on their own merits rather than in comparison to others. She had channeled her energy into causes close to her heart, building a substantial body of work that earned respect even from those who had once been skeptical. The hurt from Philip's will had not disappeared entirely, but it had faded into something more manageable. A reminder that acceptance and validation had to come from within rather than from others. Judgments. The service itself was simple and dignified, reflecting Philip's no-nonsense approach to ceremony. There were readings from Scripture that Philip had selected himself before his death, pieces chosen for their emphasis on duty, service, and stewardship of creation. There were no lengthy eulogies or elaborate rituals, just straightforward acknowledgement of a life lived in a continuing commitment to the values Philip had embodied. Following the service, the family gathered for a private lunch in the castle's state dining room. The conversation was surprisingly light, with family members sharing favorite memories of Philip, laughing at his infamous gaffes, and marveling at his boundless energy, even in old age. Catherine found herself telling a story about one of their last conversations. When Philip had quizzed her extensively about climate change policy and then pronounced her understanding adequate, which is more than I can say for most politicians. The family laughed, recognizing Philip's backhanded way of giving compliments as the afternoon progressed. The conversation turned more serious, addressing the challenges the monarchy faced in contemporary Britain. Public support for the institution remained strong, but was not guaranteed to last. Without continued effort to demonstrate relevance and value, Charles spoke about his vision for a streamlined monarchy, one that focused resources on core functions while maintaining the pageantry and tradition that people valued. Catherine contributed thoughts about engaging younger generations through digital platforms and addressing issues they cared about, particularly environmental sustainability and social justice. It was during this conversation that the full significance of Philip's will became clear to everyone present. He had not simply been distributing property or favoring one family member over another. He had been making strategic choices about the monarchy's future. investing in those he believed could best navigate the challenges ahead. By placing such substantial resources and responsibility in Catherine's hands, Philip had been signaling his belief that she represented the kind of leadership the institution needed, grounded in tradition but forward-looking, privileged but empathetic, powerful but humble. Listening to this discussion felt a shift in her own understanding. She realized that Philip's choices had not really been about her at all. They had been about identifying who could best serve the specific needs of the monarchy at a particular historical moment. Catherine's youth, her common background, her fresh perspective. These were advantages for certain kinds of work that Camilla's different strengths and experiences did not suit as well. There was no judgment of worth in Philip's decision. It's only an assessment of fit for purpose. This realization brought Camilla a sense of peace she had not previously felt about the situation. She looked across the table at Catherine, who was animatedly explaining some initiative the trust was developing, and felt genuine admiration for her sister-in-law's passion and capability. Later, when they had a private moment, Camilla told Catherine that Philip had been right to trust her with his legacy. Catherine, moved by this generosity, thanked Camilla for her grace throughout what could have been a divisive situation. As evening approached, and the family began to depart, Catherine asked William to walk with her through the castle grounds. They followed paths that Philip had walked countless times. Discussing everything from horses to philosophy during his decades at Windsor, Catherine told William about her plans for the trust's next phase, ambitious expansions that would multiply its impact. She also spoke about her nervousness, her fear that she might somehow fail to live up to Philip's expectations or squander the opportunities he had created. William reminded her that Philip had not expected perfection. He had expected effort, integrity, and genuine commitment to something beyond self-interest. By those measures, William assured her, she was exceeding expectations. Philip had chosen wisely. And the proof was visible in the tangible good the trust was doing and in Catherine's own growth as a leader and thinker. The jewelry collection, the books, the financial resources, these were important. But what Philip had really given Catherine was confidence and a clear mission. Those gifts were proving more valuable than any material legacy. In the months that followed, life continued its familiar rhythms for the royal family. Catherine balanced her trust work with her other royal duties and her role as mother to 3 children who were growing up with astonishing speed. She had learned to compartmentalize, to focus fully on whatever task was at hand without being overwhelmed by the totality of her responsibilities. This skill, learned through necessity, made her increasingly effective in all her various roles. The trust announced several major initiatives, including a partnership with leading universities to create research, fellowships in environmental science, and a program to place young, conservation leaders in decision-making roles within government and industry. These programs bore Philip's stamp in their focus on practical action rather than theoretical discussion. Catherine was often quoted saying that Philip had believed in learning by doing, in getting one's hands dirty, and she ensured the trust embodied that philosophy. Public interest in the trust remained high. With regular media coverage of its activities and achievements, Catherine became known as much for her substantive work as for her fashion or family life. Serious publications profiled her leadership of the trust, analyzing her approach and measuring outcomes. The coverage was not universally positive. There were debates about effectiveness, questions about resource allocation, and occasional criticism of specific decisions, but it was substantive engagement. Rather than superficial celebrity coverage within the royal family, Catherine's position had solidified. She was no longer the newcomer finding her way, but an established member of the institution with her own portfolio of responsibilities and recognized expertise. When major family decisions needed to be made, her input was sought and valued. She had become, without anyone formally declaring it, a key architect of the monarchy's evolution into the 21st century, 5 years after Philip's death. Catherine stood again at a podium, this time at an international conference on sustainable development. She was there to present the Trust's model as a case study in effective philanthropy and youth engagement. Her speech drew on everything Philip had taught her, everything she had learned through trial and error, and everything she had observed about what actually worked in creating positive change. The audience, comprised of foundation leaders, policymakers, and activists from around the world, listened intently,